Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, whatever time it is, it doesn't matter because time doesn't exist. We're here on my time. I am Des the Mess. My pronouns are they, she. We are going to dive right back into Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book. We left off last time at more about alcoholism. Before we commence with this program of action, we have to get over a hurdle, one that I struggled with a lot. See, there's this whole God thing in the program, and, well, that's what this whole series is about. How does a Satanist navigate AA? We're about to read one of my favorite chapters, We Agnostics. I say it's one of my favorites because when I first got sober in 2018, I like to pick this apart to pieces, in fact. Anyway, this has become one of my favorite chapters because of two specific lines that we'll get to. And why don't we just hop right in? I don't need to sit here and monologue at you. I'm going to be monologuing for the rest of the video. Chapter 4, We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, that's me, could be you. Such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, or to live on a spiritual basis, are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. Couple things. When they say something like half of us, they mean estimated 50, because somewhere in the first 100 helped write this book. That's a statistic that we probably can't prove. As far as the half goes, I'm not going to pick that apart. What I am going to say is, I'm an atheist or an agnostic, specifically a Satanist, a non-theist, a deist if you want to get into specifics, like further specifics. And if you're here, you're probably wondering, how the hell do I do this? Well, that's what we're going to discover. We talked a bit about this in There Is a Solution, where we reference the spiritual appendix, and I'm not going to beat that dead horse anymore. But what I can say is the main takeaway from that episode was connection is the opposite of addiction. So, knowing that, we are met with one of my favorite ideas. Spirituality is about my connection with myself and the world around me, including the people in it, of course. When you get into like higher power and stuff, that's all muddy waters that we will tread very soon. The point, though, is that if my spirituality is about my connection to myself, others, and the world around me, then I've already taken some of that edge off of what I think my higher power can be. Again, not going to beat the dead horse from the spiritual appendix, but if we take what we learned in that video and in that section of the book, and we apply it now, we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. We must find a connection to ourselves, the world, and the people around us, or else. Why? Because connection's the opposite of addiction. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted, in fact, we could will these things with all our might. But the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times, we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded, or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. I, for instance, was a militant atheist and anti-religionist in my 20s. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet, in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Right there. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. I have said this before, and I'm sharing this sentiment again. Anyone ever tells you you have to believe in their idea of a higher power, if you're navigating a 12-step program and they say, you need my God, you need Jesus, you need a very specific kind of deity or whatever, tell them politely to fuck off. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men and women and non-binary people and anybody who isn't mentioned here because, again, patriarchy. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies, too, to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we used our own conception, however limited it was. Okay, I lied when I said I wasn't going to beat that dead horse because I'm about to quote it. With few exceptions, our members finally have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. Right there. so we used our own conception, however limited it was. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Powers greater than myself could be a lot of things. I'm not going to worship the law, but the law is a power greater than me. I'm not going to worship a group of people, but a group of people is a power greater than myself. When I look to those things, suddenly the concept of a power greater than myself is more attainable, especially when I make it the group of drunks, good orderly direction, great outdoors, grace over drama. Again, I could go on because I've got like 20 of those lined up. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? I am. I just listed a few. As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Asterisk. Please be sure to read Appendix 2 on spiritual experience. See, I only technically lied because I brought it up before the asterisk, but I knew it was coming. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, "I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him." So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. This part I like to pick apart because it was written in the 30s. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of a doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing. It probably does. Means nothing. I think that's true. And proceeds nowhere. There are two absolutes in life, two guarantees: disease and death. Ben Franklin said death and taxes, but that's not the point. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? You know, I don't fucking think so, and that's okay. This is one of those lines that I really struggled with early on. It's underlined. If you could see my book, and you can kind of see it, parts of this are just highlighted to shit. Highlighted and underlined and bracketed, because I wanted all of this. Here's a sidebar. When I was in rehab in 2018, there was a guy who was like, you have to believe in a he-him Christian God. Like, straight up. He was like, you cannot get sober if you believe any other way. This guy had like 20 more days than I did. I wasn't really trying to argue with him, but I did. Because I was the agnostic, atheist, Satanist. And I wanted to make sure other people knew, just as much as I did, that this was about a power greater than myself, of my own conception. I knew that enough early on in sobriety the first time. I knew that enough. Because, second sidebar, when I first showed up at rehab, they found some of my Satanist books, and they're like, oh, you gotta get rid of that, blah, 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 blah. Well, I didn't, and I'm still a Satanist. It's been 7 years. It's actually been a lot longer than that. But 7 years since I walked into rehab, and my ideas of God have not changed. Not changed significantly. I'm slightly more agnostic than I was, but not really because of AA, more because of just the way life is and the way science points to things. Coming back to my first sidebar, I was using the AA Big Book and a massive dictionary that I found, and I was just taking words out of this and taking words out of the dictionary and defining, and I was like prepared to write an essay because I was gonna rip this guy a new one. And my sponsor was like, what's the point? You can be right or you can be happy. And to this day, I say I would rather be right because being right makes me happy. I said that then, and I say it now, and sometimes I bite my tongue about it, because sometimes it does pay to be happy instead of right. But I wanted to define God for myself. And in those early days, when I was like prepared to write this essay and define all of these things, I found it. I found out that I could use a power greater than myself, which at that point was the tenets of the Satanic Temple, to further my recovery. And that's really all I needed at the time. Now, I have a much more nuanced understanding of my higher power. Like I've said, I pray, I meditate, I do rituals. I can have conversations with other people about their ideas of God and higher power without being offended or wincing or cringing. So I'm 2 sidebars deep, and want to get back to the reading. But the point of all of that was, rather vain of us, wasn't it, for me to think there is no God? I don't really think that's vain. Okay, there's the third sidebar, and then we'll come back. The Taoist thought, one of the first lines, like the first line, a way that can be walked is not the eternal way. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Therefore, when I look at a tree, I call it a tree because I'm a vain human who has adopted language that vain, arrogant humans attached to it. A tree is not a tree. A tree is whatever the fuck it is before we called it a tree. I can't even define it because I don't know what it is. Lao Tzu was onto something when he said that. And this is, a long time ago. I don't remember. The point is, if I'm putting a name to something, I've already lessened its power. The tree is not a tree. The tree is whatever the fuck it was before humans called it a tree, specifically in the English language. It's a lot of other things in a lot of other languages, and it's none of those things, right? Wrap your head around that. The tree is just whatever the fuck it was before we put name and language on it. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? Therefore, whatever started the universe, this is where my triple tangent was going. Whatever started the universe, the beginning of the Big Bang, if you believe that, or creation, or whatever. The point is, there was a specific moment in universe history where there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was something. My agnostic atheist brain says that point at which that spark of life happened, that created this, that allows me to be here on YouTube and talk shit about AA and Satanism and ICP and whatever else. That's God. Not in a, hunched over white bearded man who's going to punish me for being trans and gay. Just that's the unknown. Okay? There's known unknowns. There are known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns. For me, God is a known unknown. I will never know what the fuck it is, and I also don't care, because it probably doesn't care about me. Because statistically speaking, whatever started the universe probably died a long fucking time ago with the creation of the universe. It could have been the universe before it, right? Like, for all we know, the universe could have collapsed in upon itself and then burst back. So the old universe dies and then creates this new universe in expansion. I don't know. I don't do science. My point is, that's God. It could be this repetitious cycle of existence, Maybe when I have deja vu, it's because I've done this an infinite amount of times before. I don't know. When I start putting a name to it and I call it God, that's just a way for me to talk to other people who have an idea of what God is. But it's easier for me to talk about that by using their language. God is whatever God is or was before we put a name to it. Therefore, the beginning of the universe, whatever started it, whether we're in a simulation or literally, breaking a rib and creating Eve and Adam, like, whatever started this process that allows me to be here to talk to you about this, that's God. And I don't know what God is, and I also don't care. I don't believe it's a intelligent, overbearing deity that necessarily underlines all of the things, as they were saying. And I don't have to. Why? Because my idea of higher power comes from that inner resource, which I presently identify with my own conception of a power greater than myself, which is typically the group, the fellowship of AA, the 12-step programs. All of that stuff keeps me sober. When I put a name to God, it's no longer God. It's defined by my perspective, my perception. And that's wrong, because whatever it is, or was, if it is, was there long before it had a name. That's the whole, first there was nothing, and then there was the Word, and the Word was God. Exactly. The Word. The Word was God. Before that, it was nothing. And that's okay with me, because I don't fucking know. Scientists don't know. We will probably never figure out what happened before this universe formed, and I'm okay knowing that. I'm here. I got limited time. I just spent a bunch of it going off on like 5 tangents. Maybe I have ADHD. I don't think so. But maybe. Rather vain of me, wasn't it? We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Quick sidebar, because I don't want to get too distracted, because you who are watching know that I like to get distracted. All these books behind me here, right? I'm bad at pointing backwards. All of this behind me, right? There's a bunch of books about religion and spirituality and all sorts of stuff. And I've read a lot of them, not all of them, and I've read pieces of most of them. Since I was like 19, right? Maybe earlier than that, 17. I started getting into witchcraft at like 16, 17. So I've read a lot of these books or pieces of them or done YouTube and internet research and blah, blah, blah. The point is, I've been doing this a while trying to figure out what is this idea of God or spirituality. AA is the first thing that's come along my path to define it clearly, that it's about my connection to myself, to others, and the world around me. And when I think about it in that context, I can read all of those books and find fundamental principles in all of them that are similar and just kind of go about my day knowing that, like, oh, wow, a lot of these have the same concepts. They're just worded differently, and they're written by different people at different times on different places in the world. It's uncanny that so many different people wrote that. I don't think so. I think what it is humans are pretty fucking smart, and we know that we shouldn't be exploiting and hurting. And anyway, this isn't an anti-capitalist rant, but it's about to be. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. Again, I was a militant atheist. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. Huge. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has, in each case, accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they showed the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Again, the presence of God, good orderly direction in my life is why I have faith. I have faith that the 12-step program works. I have faith that my sponsors in these 12-step programs are doing their thing because they have faith in their sponsors. For me, it's a borrowed faith or a faith vicariously, I would say. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Why? Because it's working for them and it works for me. And it works for me, so I pass it on to a sponsee. And I'm hoping that now that I've passed on some of this to a sponsee, they will be prepared to pass it on to other people. And if they struggle with their faith, they know that I have faith. Why? Because I have faith that my sponsor has faith, that their sponsor has faith, that so forth and so on until Bill W. and Dr. Bob had enough faith to say we should start a fucking program. Simple as that. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet, in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said, God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it, maybe not so long either. This was written in the 1930s, and less than 30 years later, we were on the moon. We've made much bigger leaps in the last 2 decades. It's 2025, right? This program is almost 100 years old. The book is almost 100 years old, specifically. That's nuts. That's nuts. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new? By the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does? We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether or not we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. They are really pushing it here. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted the Wrights would never fly. Well, actually, because I'm doing that now. Well, actually, the God idea works for people who need God. I don't need God, but it's not self-sufficiency. I'm reliant on other people in the program, as I said earlier. Why? Because I have tapped into an unsuspected inner resource, which I presently identify with my own conception of a power greater than myself, which I believe is connection. Connection is the opposite of addiction. This all sinking in? I hope so. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason. to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to a reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, "We don't know." When we become alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? My choice, my definition, based on that, is exactly that sentence. Do I believe in God? God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. That's my answer. There's no yes, there's no no. I don't fucking know, and I don't care. God either is or he isn't. I'm going to continue living my life in such a way that doesn't matter if there is a God. Simple as that. What was our choice to be? Our choice is God is everything or else he's nothing. God either is or he isn't. That's my choice. I don't care. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. That doesn't contradict anything that I've talked about with my own personal beliefs, or lack thereof. We found, too, that we had been worshippers. What a state of mental gooseflesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? As a Satanist, a lot of us worship ourselves. I don't, because I'm not an I-theist in the, Levian or Church of Rational Satanism sort of way. But that doesn't discount the fact that lots of Satanists make their existence about self-deification. I believe in aspects of that. I wouldn't be doing 12-step program if I didn't believe that. Why? Because if I am supposed to be making myself more godlike as I grow in the world, does it serve me to do drugs and alcohol anymore? No. And then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower, nature, great outdoors? Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith, or love, or worship. In one form or another, we had been living by faith, and little else. Imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. Why not? I do. I'm a nihilist. It's, in the grand scheme of things, none of this shit matters, right? This whole thing is a mass of electrons created out of nothing. We said that. It might have come from something before. We can't prove that. We know that at some point in the universe there was a bead of nothingness that just became. Don't know how. I don't care. Created out of nothing. Meaning nothing. Cosmic indifference. That's really all this is. We, humans, have a sense of cosmic narcissism. I'm quoting Hail the Sun because they have a song about this sort of thing. Don't say I'm important. I am a piece of the puzzle. I am a stitch in the fabric that holds this entire thing together. But I'm not that fucking special. And I'm okay with that. It means nothing. It whirls on to a destiny of nothingness. Eventually, I will die. My energies will be recycled into probably the planet and reused for whatever purposes until this universe's life cycle is over. I will probably, as I exist, not exist at some point in the future. And I probably won't be put back together the same way. And that's okay. If I'm wrong, I won't be able to prove it. And I also don't care. Of course we couldn't. Well, I just said I did. The electrons themselves seemed more intelligent than that. At least, so the chemists said. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who proved that man could never fly? Yet we had been seeing another kind of flight. A spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but liked to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives, are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. With few exceptions, our members find that they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource which they presently identify with their own conception of a power greater than themselves. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. Again, they're using a lot of patriarchal Christian coded language. He, him, capital G God. Why? Because that's what's mostly accessible to people. Believe it or not. Most people aren't atheists and agnostics. That doesn't discount those of us who are. But if you're going to reach a lot of people, this was the common language. This was the easiest way to talk to people. When someone else says God or higher power, they're speaking French and I'm speaking English. We are meeting in the middle. It's not a perfect translation, and I know that, but it fucking works. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to communicate, and I'd be blocking out everything they said. When someone tells me they pray for me, they're thinking about me. When someone else says that they see, God working in my life, what they're telling me is they see my life working out for myself. That's it. I don't think too much more deeply than that. I don't get offended. I don't cry. I don't fucking protest about it. I stopped joining a religion about it. It's easy for me to digest that I don't have to believe in someone else's God to have some sort of idea of a higher power that is tangible to me in such a way that connection to other people is. Why? Because connection is the opposite of addiction, and connection is my definition of spirituality. Therefore, spirituality is thus the opposite of addiction. In that, right? A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. In that. We can only clear the ground a bit. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come to you. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school, where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? Yeah, that is a possibility, and that's okay. While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. This is the second important line, right? The first one, I forgot to point out. I mean, I talked about it, but, the first one was about, could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling onto a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. Yes, we can. That's the first most important line. The second one here, who are you to say there is no God? Nobody. I'm just me. I'm just me. I'm not saying there's no God. I'm saying I don't believe in a God in a religious sense. I don't believe in God even in a spiritual sense. I use the word God for that thing I don't fucking understand. And that's it. And that makes it easier for me. Why? So when other people are talking about God and they're like, well, God works in mysterious ways, what they're saying is, gee, the things that I don't understand about life sure work in mysterious ways. Wow. That's so much easier to digest than trying to think about like some Christian or, whatever punishing Catholic God will say that's like slamming down on you because you're gay. It's easier for me to digest if I say they believe in the thing and they're putting a name to the thing that I don't know what to call. I'm going to call it God so I can talk to them about it. I'm only calling it God because that's what they call it in the book, and that's what other people are calling it in the program if they believe in a capital G-O-D. That's fine by me. It doesn't stop me from being sober. So who am I to say there is no God? I'm just a human being. I'm just a human being. In the grand scheme of the universe, my life means nothing and is destined to nothingness, and that is quite fucking okay with me. So who am I to say there is no God? Nobody. Why? Because I don't care. This man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. So we just digested a lot. Okay? Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. Again, if I'm simplifying this, I would think it's a form of insanity if I was trying over and over again to prove that there is no God. But I also don't have to prove that there is one. I just don't care. So in that way, yeah, the idea of God has restored me to sanity. That's an ironic twist. I just don't think about it, right? Like day to day. Talking about it here, going to meetings where other people are talking about it, I think about it. I'm not like, when I was younger and I'd walk around kind of, literally with a pipe in my hand and be like, I wonder if God exists. I really had those moments. I don't do that anymore. I don't care. I have the philosophies that I have the beliefs that I have a certain kind of faith that I have, that I don't care if God exists or not. Whatever God is probably not watching me. Probably doesn't have rules, except maybe the scientific rules of the universe that we're still figuring out. But, like, really, the people who use capital G God in vain, I'm gonna go on a tangent here. I talked to a friend of mine about this a while ago. When I lived in Cleveland, some people say, you know, don't use God's name in vain. A lot of people interpret that to mean when you are frustrated and you go, oh my God, or Jesus Christ, don't use the Lord's name in vain. No. Don't use God's name in vain, meaning don't use it for vain ends, okay? Don't get up on a pedestal and say God hates fags and fucking rail against gay people. Don't use God to infiltrate the government and slam down on people who don't. Calling atheists terrorists and violent extremists. I got a new label last week, right? Nihilistic violent extremist. Why? Because I'm trans. That's ridiculous. And you know where it comes from? People who have faith in a very specific kind of God. Their capital G God is the reason why I don't believe in their capital G God. But I have a sense of, like I already said that, I have a sense of what God is and what God isn't, and I don't think about it too much. I don't have faith in that God. I just have faith that things are the way that they are. I have limited experience to pull from here, right? I've been alive for 34 years. The world has existed for much longer, and the universe way more longer than that. I am a speck of dust, a grain of sand on like a desert planet. Essentially, I'm not even that. I'm the equivalent of an electron, we'll say, or maybe a quark or something, right? Like, I am so infinitesimally small in the grand scheme of things that I really don't know, but I also don't care if something's really looking down on me, because they have to be really fucking bored, just like you are if you're here. But hey, that's why I'm doing this, right? I love talking about this stuff. I love applying it to my recovery. I love hearing what you have to say, what you think. Leave comments below. Seriously, engage with my stuff. Not a lot of people do, and that's okay. Maybe you just like to watch, voyeur, whatever, weirdo. I love you, strangers on the internet. The point is, if something's watching me on a spiritual, metaphysical sense, I really don't care, and I'll find out when I die, or I won't, because I'll lose consciousness. I'm not worried about it. I can't worry about it, because I will spend the rest of my life worrying about it if I start. I have anxiety about what someone's going to say to me tomorrow in a future that doesn't even exist. Could you imagine if I was still living in that mind frame of trying to like prove or disprove God for myself and then for other people? In that way, I would rather be happy than right. I'm happy not knowing. I don't give a fuck. I hope you don't give a fuck either. I hope you give just enough of a fuck. I don't know if I've said give a fuck enough. That you're here. We're here. You're listening to my monologue. We're having a great time. This has been We Agnostics in the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. I have been Des the Mess. My pronouns are and have been, and I don't say always will be, because I could change them one day if I wanted to, but they, she, just call me anything except late for dinner. I really don't give a fuck anymore. I'm happy most of the time. I'm also right a lot of the time. I don't think that's a coincidence. But hey, this is how I'm doing recovery. Maybe it's how you're doing recovery. Maybe you just wanted some perspective. We're all here doing our own thing. Catch you later.